Good morning. Oh, it's nice to be here again. Before I begin, I have a little bit of business. I have to say I love Dr. Edward Vioun, don't you? Yes. Okay, thank you. Edward and I have been we're both on the same committee, the Cultural Evolution and Cultural Integrity and Evolution Community for Centers for Spiritual Living. And Edward was a leader in developing this annual theme of a world that works for everyone that over 100 Centers for Spiritual Living are participating in. So it's all good stuff happening. I have to share my wife, Dorianne Cotter-Lockard, is the president of the Science of Mind Archives and Foundation. And if you're interested in that, please take a look at somarchives.org or just Google Science of Mind Archives, and you'll find a rich repository online of talks by Ernest Holmes, radio shows that he did. All of the Science of Mind and Creative Thought magazines are being uploaded. Almost all of that is you can access for free. And there's ebooks and lots of wonderful materials for any New Thought student. So check that out, Science of Mind Archives and Library. I want to thank our musicians, Christopher, Antonio, and Paul, who are doing a beautiful job. You know, they say a musician is someone who will take $5,000 worth of equipment, put it into a $500 car, drive 100 miles to do a $50 gig. Right? So may you love what you do that much, for sure. So let's get this going here. So my topic, which is the topic of the Global Vision this week, is suffering. And it's interesting that they made it the second topic of the year because I think it's something we just want to get out of the way. Let's deal with this up front. And it's kind of ironic that I'm speaking here on this topic because if you understood the last year of my life, you'd see I haven't suffered at all in the last year of my life. Dorianne and I, back in the beginning of 2015, I left the pulpit at Simi Valley. We sold our home, we sold our cars, we found homes for the cats, and we took off. And we've been in 13 countries, traveling all around. We're in California for a pit stop to go to our storage locker and swap our Hawaii clothes for our winter clothes, and then we're off again. So it's been really a wonderful, wonderful experience for us, and I think for both of us, having been in this teaching for over 20 years, it's sort of evidence that we've kind of gotten it to a certain extent, that we're living the life of our dreams right now. And right now it involves being nomadic. I think that will change to a degree over the next year or two, but for now, we're homeless. And I have to tell you, it's not bad. Every time we drive past a Home Depot, we high-five each other because we don't need anything in there. You know, it's just So suffering is something, let's just get a definition here, because suffering is not having something bad happen in your life. Okay, having difficulty in your life, having loss, having pain, having illness, all those kinds of things are inevitable. They're part of the deal. They're part of the package. You know, since Kim Kaiser's here, I'll mention Buddhism, the Four Noble Truths. First is they often say all life is suffering. I think a more correct interpretation of that is all life is difficult and that suffering is unnecessary. So how do we confront the difficulties of life without suffering? And I would describe suffering as making a bad situation worse. Okay? For example, anyone ever had a problem? Anyone had a problem? Okay. Does anyone have one now? Okay. Well, yeah, we all do. We all have issues, problems. You can call them challenges if you're really into positive thinking. But they kind of feel the same, right? And maybe they keep you up at night. And maybe you've spent a lot of time in tears and sadness and sorrow around issues and difficulties in life. And it can be anything. My biggest problem the past year was I lost my Ray-Ban sunglasses getting on a train in Marseille, France. It was sad. And my wife won't let me buy another pair of expensive sunglasses because I keep losing them. So now I'm in $5 sunglasses, and it's tragic. But at the time, that was my biggest problem. And I treated it like a big problem. I got on the train, I was like, you know. And it took me 5 or 10 minutes of thinking about it to say, come on, I'm in southern France, I'm going to Avignon, I'll squint. And we all have that capacity to move beyond, or I could have obsessed about that for weeks or months or up until now, right? And you say, well, that's no big problem. You don't know the kind of problems I've got. I've got really big problems, you might be saying. You might be thinking that right now. Well, try doing that with my problem. No thanks, you can keep your problems. But I've had bigger problems than that. I lost a daughter who was 18. Yeah. Did I get over it? No. You're transformed by it. But after a point of grieving, the choice to suffer is a choice. You see? So big or small, we are always at choice at some level. What we often fail to do is understand the difference between something bad happening and suffering about it. Many people, when they come into this kind of a teaching, they get the impression that if they're doing it right, nothing will ever go wrong in their lives. You won't get sick. You won't have too much month at the end of the money. No one will be the matter with you, you know. And what happens? Somebody gets sick and they don't come to church because they're afraid of showing up in a place where they might be seen as imperfect, right? Yeah, why should I go to the place where I'll get spiritual support when I'm feeling bad about myself? Well, you know, when we suffer, we're not in logic. We're not in a logical frame of mind. We're in an illogical frame of mind, driven by emotions that often come from a sense of I'm not enough or I don't deserve a better life. You know, we've all been there. I know I lived most of my life there. When I was a police officer for 24 years in Miami, it was exciting. But it was very easy to fall into negative mindsets, right? There was they didn't send me to places where things were going well. So I spent a lot of time in inner torment about what kind of world this was and my role in it. And I stumbled into the Science of Mind Center in Fort Lauderdale in 1989 at the recommendation of some officers that I worked with. And I began to see there was a different way to look at life. But I also know within this teaching, as I've been in it and I've written about it and I've taught it, that it's easy for us to put our own conditioning onto how we understand it and therefore limit our capacity to use it. So let's take a look. Jose Marti, I'm betting this is the first quote from Jose Marti that's ever been posted here. You know who he had, the Cuban Revolution and so forth. He says, man has to suffer. When he has no real afflictions, he invents some. Now, that's not necessarily true universally, but it certainly is true probably for all of us at one time or another. You know, there's a whole industry out there to try to remind you that your life is going better than you think it is. But yet sometimes we refuse to buy into that, and we obsess about our lost sunglasses and miss the beauty of southern France, let's say. Or we obsess about what might not be going well in our life, and we miss the beauty of our children growing up. Because we become into that place of extending the pain. Okay. Some of us brag about it. We have whole relationships built on suffering. We go to lunch with people and we share the tragedies of our lives and how no one is cooperating to make us happy. No matter what we do, it's not good enough. And then you get to speak for 20 minutes and then you have to listen to their problems because that's the deal. That's what codependency is all about. Some of us, if we got our lives in order, we wouldn't know who to hang around with anymore. You show up at work one day and you're happy, and everybody's like, "What's wrong with you?" Come on, we'll get you back to where you belong. Don't worry. Remind you of how tragic everything is. So we tend to do that. We tend to do that because we live in a culture that elevates suffering to a high level. Just turn on the television. Not the news, the TV shows, the reality shows, the talk shows. Let's find the most tragically, the people in the most tragic circumstances who have the least capability to deal with it and put them on stage and see what happens. And that's bad enough, but then millions of people tune in to say, well, my life maybe isn't so bad. There's somebody worse. Isn't that sad? Yeah, we all know collectively that it's sad. You wouldn't be here if you supported that in the sense of seeing it as the way things are. But that suffering that pervades our culture makes it difficult to grow up in a different mindset. I was reading an article in the New Yorker this week about the Ford Foundation, and the president of the Ford Foundation, whose name just flew out of my head, is an African-American man from one of the poorest towns in Louisiana who's gay. And it's a beautiful article. It really does go into his childhood and how he developed a mindset that he was very discerning about who he listened to. And he decided as a young boy he would listen to the people that supported him, and he'd ignore the others. Now that pretty much makes him an exception. That's why there's an article about him, because if this happened all the time, it would be no big deal. But we know it doesn't happen all the time. Many of us are trapped in the circumstances and the worldview in which we were born. What was the conversation around your dinner table when you were little? And maybe it was positive and uplifting, and maybe it was kind of, doesn't the world suck? So we have to understand that and then say, okay, to what degree am I immersed in that kind of thinking, and what am I going to do about it? It's old stuff, The idea of suffering, I think, is an extension of our evolutionary trait of being in fear, which kept your ancestors alive. You're here because your ancestors were in fear. Because they knew back in the day, you go back to pre-biblical times, and 100% of the time you were worried about staying alive. Can I find enough food? Am I going to get eaten by a lion? Or is the next tribe going to come over the hill and kill me and take all my stuff? That was pretty much 24/7 the mindset. And the ones that survived were the ones that were able to use that fear in a way to stay alive and breed. Now today, we live in a much more civilized world. We do. And we don't have to worry about staying alive moment to moment unless you watch too much cable news. And you think ISIS is in your bathroom. So what do? We take that evolutionary trait and we project it out into our feeling world and into our psychological world, and we take losing our sunglasses on the train in Marseille and develop it into a huge issue, maybe. Or we lose someone dear to us and we never grieve properly because we're afraid that if we do, we'll lose ourselves somehow. Or we're afraid that if we stop grieving and move on with our lives, we'll be disloyal to the person we lost. So we perpetuate suffering beyond the legitimate nature of the pain. And that's really what I think Ernest Holmes was about trying to get us to stop doing, to move beyond it, to move into a life of joy, even though there are sorrows within it. Joseph Campbell talks about the idea of living joyfully in the sorrows of the world. He says you can't cure the world of sorrows, but you can learn to live in joy. And at minimum, you can become a way shower or an example for others who will pay attention to what you're doing and say, I'd like to be like that. I think our centers grow when they grow, but not because of the minister being so great, that's helpful, but because people that come to the center go out and live lives that work, and other people say, where'd you get that? How do I get it? So one type of suffering is self-criticism. I love that image. I hate it, but I love it. It's one of those like, whew, every now and then I have to pull it out and look at it. Am I doing this? Am I beating myself up? Because I was conditioned in an earlier phase of my life to think less of myself for some reason. I listened to those naysayers, who may have been very well-meaning. I mean, when my grandmother told me not to get a big head, which didn't happen, she was looking out for my best interest. She was saying, don't stick your neck out. Don't rise too far above the crowd or they'll cut your head off. That was her worldview. And when my dad would walk by and I'd be sitting there zoned out on the sofa, because daydreaming, lost in a reverie of some kind, he'd say, hey, get up and do something. Be productive. Because that was his worldview, that if you slowed down too much, the world would overrun you. Now, I wasn't sitting there psychologically analyzing them at 6 or 7 years old. I was absorbing the wisdom of my elders. See? And it became part of my unconscious process. And it wasn't until much later that I realized that had even happened. I just thought they were right. Why would they lie to me? See? Another type of suffering is worrying. Now, worrying's kind of interesting. It's the use of the power of mind for what you don't want. Right? Do you ever worry about something you really want to happen? I'm so worried I'm going to get a vacation this year, and what am I going to do? I'm so worried that, when you're a kid, that girl's going to walk across the gym and say yes when I ask her to dance. Oh. Well, actually, you are worried about that. And rightfully so, I might add. No, but worrying from the context of what else can go wrong? Or how can this good that just happened in my life be taken away from me? And, one thing about worrying, we all do it to some extent, but one thing about worrying is you're never happy when you're worrying. They're kind of mutually exclusive territory. So it's a nice thing to try to get away from worrying and how do I do that? I've been worrying all my life. Well, I think about what you want to have happen and do a practice to help inculcate that into your mind by writing it out in affirmation form, maybe doing a spiritual mind treatment about it. Well, I can't help it. I'm a worrier. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to stop. Well, go see a practitioner or get some spiritual counseling here. I'm sure there are people that can take care of that for you. Not that they'll take care of it for you. They will show you how to take care of it yourself. But worrying is something that we're here to transcend. We're here to move beyond it. It doesn't serve us. Now, this is not to say you become Pollyanna and refuse to see anything that might have a potential danger or difficulty in it. It means you just don't dwell in the negative. You see it and you move through it or beyond it as best you can. See, I don't want to diminish the fact that many people have suffered and do suffer in this world. It's not that it's so wrong, it's that it's unnecessary. So we have to love ourselves beyond it, love ourselves through it. Byron Katie says, you move totally away from reality when you believe there's a legitimate reason to suffer. Now again, suffering as the extension of the pain beyond what it would need to be in order to get your attention and in order to have you move into a different way of being. My dad held grudges his whole life. when he was on his deathbed in hospice, he kind of had this, for 2 weeks, he was nice. And my stepmother was like amazed, and because he'd never been really nice to her. And I said to him, his brother called me, and he and his brother hadn't talked for 25 years because of some furniture he took when their mother died. His brother took, and my father never released him from that. And I said, Dad, you're in kind of a good mood. You seem to be, he's about to die, but he's in kind of a good mood, and he's about to die. Carol called, would like to come see you. No. No, that was it. No, wouldn't do it. Wouldn't do it. Carried that forward into the next experience somehow. That's sad, and see, the lesson in that for me is, there but for the grace of God go I, unless I really look at the things that were valuable that I learned from my dad, which were many, but the things that could be very destructive if I incorporate them still. Sophocles, that's an old photo of him. He said, it's a painful thing to look at your own trouble and know that you yourself and no one else has made it. I just put this in to remind you that the idea of self-responsibility is not new. It's been around for a long time. They recognized back in the day that you create your own stuff. There's a larger culture that says, no, you don't. It's not your fault. You're a victim. Therefore, you're powerless. But that culture is not necessarily speaking the truth. The truth is usually harder to find in a culture than the stuff that isn't true. Just the way we are. So I would say I'm not responsible for every condition in my life, but I'm fully accountable for my response to every condition in my life. The example that somebody in class once asked me, well, what if you're walking down the street and an elephant falls out of the 5th floor building and lands on you? How did you create that? I said, I don't really care. I've got an elephant on me. And that's not even the point. The point is, now what do I do? What do I do? How do I want to deal with this elephant that's landed on me? I mean, maybe I've been conditioned to believe if I wail and moan and make a big deal out of it, I'll get more attention, and I'm starved for attention. Maybe that's the style that I've cultivated or been taught unwittingly. But what I want to ask myself in those situations is, what would love do here? What would grace do here? And that may be something that's far away from my capacity to grasp, but at least by asking the question, I may bring it a little closer. A little closer. Dr. Holmes says, surely there can be no intelligence in the universe that wishes, I'm just going to make this gender correct, wishes humans to be sick, suffer pain, be unhappy, and end in oblivion. Surely if God or universal intelligence is imbued with goodness, then it could not ordain that human beings should ultimately be other than a perfect expression of life. Now, we will all probably read that in the textbook or wherever we would find it, or listen to it be said, yep, I agree, and then go out and keep suffering. Then go out and our car wouldn't start, and we go into a 3-month spiral. This is meant for us to take in and understand and accept that I am bigger than my problem. Even though I may not see that right now, it may not seem that way logically, I'm always bigger than my problem. At least a little bit. Rilke says, perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act just once with beauty and courage. Perhaps everything that frightens us is, in its deepest essence, something helpless that wants our love. What if everything is for you and nothing is against you? I don't mean that as a theoretical concept. I mean that as an absolute reality. That everything is for you and nothing is against you. The work is to figure out how it's for you. if that's not obvious. What inner quality is this circumstance or condition calling forth from me that has not heretofore been expressed? So think of your biggest problem, whatever it is. I'm thinking about my sunglasses. What is maybe being called forth from you to respond to that problem that is something that has heretofore not been fully expressed? Maybe it's more love, maybe it's more wisdom, maybe it's more strength and power. Maybe it's self-acceptance, maybe it's freedom. But that's a good thing to sit and contemplate as you think about the problem, because most times when we think about the problem, we just think, oh God, I'm screwed. How about thinking, what is being called forth from me? What am I being called? How am I being called to step up in a bigger way? Because that's why I drew this in. I drew this in somehow. Not to be defeated, but to realize a greater truth that is already so about me. So I released my sunglasses to whoever found them. And I reconciled myself to €5 sunglasses. That's $5.10 for a while. Because my wife wants it that way, and we have a mixed marriage, a man and a woman. And sometimes that's difficult. So if you'd like to connect with me, I'm on Facebook as me and on Twitter as me, and my blog is newthought@wordpress.com. And there I write about issues affecting New Thought and leadership and so forth in the world. And I reference Edward's blogs a lot, so it'd be great to connect with some of you. And let's close with a prayer, shall we? Nice deep breath. Let it out with a sigh. So this I know. There's only one thing happening here, and that is spirit unfolding, evolving, and expressing as you and as me. And we collectively create the world that we inhabit. And we specifically create the world of our own individual experience. So as I'm creating that world of my own experience, let me do it from a space of a deep resonant field of good, of love, of joy, of power, peace, beauty, and possibility. Let me know that what I am doing is actualizing potential into form by way of my mind, by way of my consciousness, by way of my beingness. And that I have access to an infinite mind, an infinite intelligence, and an infinite field of possibility. Any limitations I see in myself are hereby released because I have access to something greater. I am more than I appear to be, and so are you. So I release myself from any need to suffer, but I accept the inevitable pain of life. And I bring my great strength and my great love and my big heart to whatever shows up in my life and in the lives of any of those who I am in connection with. I accept this truth fully in my heart, in my mind, in my soul. And with deep gratitude for this amazing realization and this intention that I now set, I release this word into the creative field that we call mind, knowing it is done unto us as we believe, and together we say, and so it is. Thank you, and namaste.